Welcome to I Have Something to Say, where unfiltered opinions meet raw authenticity. If you're tired of the same old canned answers and crave genuine conversations about real issues, then you've landed in the right spot. So buckle up for a roller coaster of diverse perspectives. Yours truly, Sami Jimen Marrero, and my co-host, Chris Majocha, will dive headfirst into topics that impact our daily lives. From the boardrooms to the streets, get ready to hear real people cut through the BS and deliver the discussions you've been waiting for. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of I Have Something to Say. And I'm very excited, and thank you for the introduction, Chris. You're awesome. To Mr. Malik Williams, the founder and CEO of Real Sync Music. And he's been in the grind for almost 3 decades as an entrepreneur. He's an Emmy nominated composer, engineer, educator, and just a community champion and advocate. And so welcome, Malik. I am so excited to have a million questions to ask you, and just thrilled that you've joined us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's great to meet you both.
Yes.
On the screen.
So you're a Boston native, are you?
I am, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I grew up in Dorchester, Roxbury, traveled around. I didn't go to Dorchester High. I went to Boston Tech, and Boston Tech is an exam school. And so to this day, I don't know why I took that exam besides following the pack, which is probably the best thing I could have done ever in my life. But because of that, I ended up just kind of like my friends to this day are just really all across, Metro Boston. That school was mostly Metro Boston. So, I would never, hung out with kids in Brookline or Chinatown and stuff like that. So that was really good for me coming up in the community and just kind of being able to meet a bunch of different people, a bunch of different opportunities, hooking school and doing some really cool stuff like going to the beach. And, I wouldn't have done that in Dorchester. We just went on the block. We still hooked school, but, we did other cool stuff, going skiing and everything else. So that was fun. So.
That's great. And so it was a technical school, and like now STEM is like a big thing, and trying to provide all communities with equitable access, right, to technology, to opportunities in engineering, and we're going way back, right, in the sense where not necessarily, right, these opportunities were available to everyone. And so then how did you connect with this opportunity and these resources, and then just decide, okay, this is the path I'm going to take?
Yeah, back then, from middle school going into high school, I have no idea to this day. I really don't. I know exactly who I was hanging around, and I'm still in touch with a lot of those I guess they were all kids, right? Those kids now. But no, I don't know. All I know, I had a choice: Boston Tech, Latin Academy, or Boston Latin. I ended up in Boston Tech. I wanted to be in Boston Tech because of exactly what you said. I kind of came up from 6th grade doing, drafting and things like that. Getting into the engineering space. I didn't understand quite what that was, but, Boston Tech was definitely concentrated on a lot of trades, right? So between math and, everything having to do with more on the engineering or STEM or STEAM, aspect of things. We didn't have STEAM language back then. The arts was something like you did randomly. But so we did have, work, wood shop and all these things that I actually really loved a lot. So till this day, I still love those things, tools and building and everything else. But I went from from Boston Tech to Wentworth, which was more pursuit of audio and architectural engineering. Mechanical and architectural engineering. And then I got into the music thing randomly while I was in, college days. But that's when all of a sudden the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, shoot, like that's what this math stuff is all about, right? Like that's what this, programming synthesizers and everything else, whatever waves I needed to to be familiar with. But it literally is kind of that simple if your brain works that way, So I think certain people that are, engineers or, that mentality of, engineering or reverse engineering something. That's something I kind of came up with. And I also had just another fun family fact: 9 brothers and sisters, right? So
Oh my
most of
goodness.
my siblings went to like Dorchester High. I think I was the only one that ended up going to Boston Tech, again randomly. So yeah, just kind of coming up around a lot of siblings, a lot of kids on the street hanging out and everything else. But music was something that was kind of like completely different path for me.
Yeah. That's
Where did
awesome. And so when did it, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm just intrigued. So how did the music come into play? Because you said you kind of fell into it like completely unexpected. So how did you combine those two, which I want to assume were passions, but you're about to confirm that, for us now.
Yeah, music was like it wasn't anything that I thought of to say I want to do this, right? So we had
Okay.
an organ at the house. My father, played like guitar and stuff like that in the military, in the army. And so, kind of fast forwarding, we always had like a piano or guitar, but in Dorchester High, they had an amazing music program. So my older siblings ended up having music in school. I was in 6th grade. I had Glee Club for 2 weeks, and that's all the music I ever had, ever, theory wise, right? So
Yeah.
fast forwarding into high school, actually around those days, my brothers used to have, my older brother in particular used to have all his friends. He was in bands, funk bands, like a lot of like really hardcore stuff that they did. So my whole like den was full of instruments all the time that I wasn't supposed to touch. But this one bass player who was really cool, he didn't care if I touched his bass. And so I ended up kind of playing around with that. But my bass before that, because I wasn't a how do I call like the bad kid that's on punishment all the time? Like that's me. That's me and my brother. So I was lucky if I got out the house in the summer. Yeah. But I had a guitar in my closet and it only had 4 strings on it. And I wasn't into music. I didn't know, no one was teaching me any of this stuff. But because it only had 4 strings, that's a bass. So I used to sit in my room. I was probably like, maybe 13, 12, 13, 14, and just learn every song on the radio with that guitar because I couldn't go outside. So that was like, well, while I'm looking outside at all my friends playing, So I just kind of did that, but it wasn't like I had this passion for music. It didn't really start more passionately, like the idea of music. I was a vocalist. So I was a vocalist first before everything. So I remember being like, 4, 5, 6 years old, kind of being made to sing, to entertain my aunts and uncles and stuff like that. And I was terrified. I was like, I could never be on screen like now when I was a kid or whatever. So I end up kind of really just being silly. I'm more silly than anything, which is a big part of my personality, which is a big part of, kind of a coping mechanism as well. My household wasn't very healthy. It's very dysfunctional and all these kids, parents that didn't like each other and everything else. So that was to me like my silliness of leaving the house. I was kind of the younger kid of some of the older kids on the block. And there was a bunch of us, there, but I had 6 sisters, right? So annoying my sisters all the time was definitely a daily thing. But one of my sisters in particular, my sister Sanji, she sings, and then some of the older ones sang. And so we would do that around the house. But what I would do, and I didn't realize this, I would learn all the Minnie Riperton type songs. I don't know if you know Minnie Riperton, her range, but basically like Mariah Carey, right?
Okay.
She's like the Mariah Carey, like that started that before. So like those really, really high registers. So I could do that when I was a kid. So when I would do everything from like a Luther Vandross to anything else, as far as having a range. I didn't realize what that was like from a technical standpoint. I just knew I was having fun singing. But because I was very introverted and shy, I never had this passion to like be on stage or go and do anything publicly. So it wasn't until like I was probably like 18 or something. Those little 3-piece bands that play at the little restaurants and stuff like that. I was invited to come out and just kind of come sing a couple of songs. And I ended up kind of doing that. Still no passion to be like in a band or anything. But I think I ran into an instrument somewhere. And all of a sudden I started like writing songs. and not kind of saying like, I want to have a record, make a record. I just started writing songs. And so my sister, around that time, invited me to sing at her Christmas party at Mass General Hospital. And my brother, that was older than me, he was playing. And then another guy from Alabama, they had a band that had come up from Alabama. My brother was in that band. I was the extra guy just coming in to come sing at the Christmas party with my sister. And then one of the guys that was there, this kid Ralph, asked me, he was like, hey, we need a bass player for the band. Can you play? And I was like, yeah, I could play bass. And I had never done it before. But he literally handed me his bass and said, here, show me whatever. So played a couple of notes, and then it was like, show up to rehearsal tomorrow. So that's how I got into the band. Nice. And at that point,
my goodness. Yeah. So practicing we like, 4-string guitar, right? That you pulled out of the closet because you were grounded for being mischievous, right?
Yeah.
Led you to, I could do that, right? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And, and part of it, so this is around my college days, right? So this is probably like, fast forwarding to about, 19, I was probably 19, 20, 21. And so that band, again, was a bunch of guys. Now, these guys were from Alabama mostly, and my brother was brilliant musician. And they were just amazing. Like the drummer played drums and guitar at the same time. I don't know if you've ever seen drummers do, like insane, playing chords and then drumming. And you couldn't even tell, like he was so good. So being around those guys, and then that's what technology kind of came in when we were in the band. That was, again, in the 90s of, sampling a lot of the electronic, gear, synthesizers, like elevating into the more, the recording and production process of music, right? So a lot of that. So as a bass player, you had to play keyboard bass at the same time. But I was also ended up being a guitar player in the band and a vocalist as well. So sometimes I would be lead vocalist, depending on what songs we did. And the cool thing about the band was all of us were multi-instrumentalists. So different songs, we all switched up to play whatever it was. I might play guitar on one and bass on the other, sing on another. And so all of those guys literally in that band ended up getting into more record production. But we were in Dorchester. We were playing in Dorchester one day, this club called Cortez, for anybody that remembers that. And there was a couple of guys that came in there that wanted to build a studio. And not normally the crowd that I'd be hanging out with per se, but they were, cool guys that ended up kind of going in that direction of building a studio. I didn't really want to be involved in that kind of that studio scene. I was there, like I'm welcome to come in and out or whatever. But I ended up just deciding to do my own thing. And where I really got into it is I was working at this other job at the time as well when I was in the band to pay for school, kind of in and out. And I had a shoulder injury and I had to eventually have a rotator cuff injury. And that lasted for almost 4 years after I was like back healed again. But the first couple of years, and it was like insurance companies fighting, they didn't want to pay for my surgery. And this one doctor that the first IME doctor was the insurance company's doctor that saw me, knew what the injury was. But because I was a little bit muscular, I was probably like 50 pounds lighter than I am now, but still, like they were like, oh, we've seen this on a Patriots player that ended up having a similar injury. I'm thinking I'm going to be good. I'll have the surgery. I'll be back. And that was like within the first like 6 months or something. And that turned into almost 3 years and like 10 doctors because the insurance company didn't want to pay. During that time, that's how I got into more production. Like I used to hang out at the music store, which is what I tell young people now. It's like, I didn't have any money, but outside of like workers' comp. So I'm not making as much money. I had my own apartment. So I'm scrambling, doing a bunch of stuff. So I needed to start to figure out how to make money. And so I built a studio in my bedroom at the time, as we all start. And that's how I ended up. So every place that I lived, this one apartment in particular, I had another space. So it ended up merging into like almost probably another bedroom or whatever it was. And so I ended up kind of literally hanging out at the music store, reading manuals. We didn't have YouTube and all the rest of this stuff back then. And so you have the network of musicians or producers that we all got a piece of software and we tried to figure out what it was. We tried to all use the same stuff, right? And this is as technology was, advancing. Really, this is kind of like more of a paradigm shift between going from analog production, the digital, right? So when I first started writing songs, we had to play all the parts all the way through. Like I had my little 4-track or whatever, so you play the piano part all the way through and the bass part all the way through. And that's the way it went. And, MIDI production and all these different ways of recording. And so I kind of got really, immersed into that because I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't go back to school, right? I ended up going from Wentworth to UMass for a little while because they kept saying surgery. And I was like, oh, I can't start school and they have to pay for it. And then, because I already couldn't pay for it in the first place. So I couldn't register and lose money. So I ended up kind of like just having to wait that whole course. And then by the time I was able to get back to work in like an engineering field, what I was going to school for, because I had other friends that had already been, getting jobs and everything else. But by that time, I was making more money recording music than I could with an entry level and getting into a job in engineering. So that was pretty much the decision that I made. I was like, I'll just keep doing this recording thing. And so I think I ended up going to with those same guys because they were all still doing records and a lot of stuff. The studio turned into like a record company subsidiary of Island Records. And so they ended up going down to Atlanta with Bobby Brown. And Bobby's my cousin. I don't say that too loud. No, Bobby's my cousin. Like back then, it was pretty crazy. Don't Be Cruel Records. Like he was on top of the world and everything else. But it was pretty toxic environment in a lot of cases, right? So we're like street guys, so it doesn't quite matter. And plus, being in the band, right, we're the cool guys, so it's just like Purple Rain, I guess, right? So it's like we could pretty much, you have immunity walking in and out of production spaces because we're the cool musicians. Like what came along with technology is the lack of like musicianship, right? Because we also didn't have music in schools and everything else. So unless you were in a little pack or like in a garage band type environment where you can show up and touch instruments or whatever, to this day, I don't think that's, unless you go to Berkeley or something like that, you're kind of not growing up. It's either church or Berkeley. If you're not in a church, you're not touching instruments anywhere. There are a couple of schools that, they're starting to try to take on the music programs again. But back then there wasn't anything. So I want to say probably at least the next 10 years, I wasn't around anyone picking up an instrument at all, any new people. So it was really just us. And we just kind of went on, I ended up leaving because I was out of work on comp. I could leave and go to Atlanta like I used to. I drive down there for a month, go stay at Bobby's house. And the thing was like MCA Records was sending us down there through the studio. So I'd go down there and go and do that. But nobody knew that I was family, and MCA used to actually put us up in Bobby's house. So I'd have to call like one of my uncles, and it was all this drama that would happen. And like, like, who are you? Because I wasn't around them, and like they knew who I was, or who my father was, and that kind of thing. But and then there's other kind of drama that used to happen as well. People like, who is this guy? And people want to fight and everything else. And so I'm like, listen, I'm calling your mother, because they didn't know they were my cousins. I'd have to call their mother and say, can you call your kid and tell you, but once that happened and it was like, oh, shoot, this is my cousin, this is my family. So again, till this day, some of those people that I kind of had like little run-ins with because of it's just a street thing. This is our territory. This is our studio. This is our clique, so I kind of, got around that. But I was mostly there from a technical aspect of it, mostly because of everything we were learning at home. With no money, trying to figure it out, reading manuals all day long. So by the time I got down to Atlanta, and they had like, Babyface and TLC and a lot of these groups were down there, it's Keith Sweat. And so being in that studio environment and understanding computers, which I was totally terrified, but a lot of my friends that kind of shared with me what that was back then, in Boston, once I went to Atlanta, then I was one of the technical people that was there. I ended up leaving mostly because of a lot of other like unhealthy things that are fun for a little while. So you realize I can't sustain this for the rest of my life. I'll be 80, 90 years old doing this stuff. So I need to, and that's what it is. So like for me, it's always been, and I think about it now because I still think about some of the people that were back then. Some people aren't here at all. Some people just are trying to still figure it out. And that's when I kind of realized, like, thinking back now on all the stuff that you may have seen about me or read about me or whatever, it's always been like in pursuit of, because I can be cool, but what does that really mean? Right. And so, and I say this all the time, especially when I'm talking to like younger people in particular, it's like, what difference does that make if I'm just cool? Right. Like, you guys have to be cool too, or it's not fun. It ain't no fun if my homies can't have none. I don't know that song, right? So they're probably talking about something different. But that whole mindset, I didn't understand that back then, right? And this is just me kind of looking back now at what I'm passionate about or what I put my energy in or my bandwidth. And I probably have definitely more bandwidth than the average bear, right? And I'm a bit of a unicorn, as people have called me. But I like to learn and I like to study and but not so much like in books or whatever. If I find out about you and what you're doing, I do go online, and same as you might do as a journalist, right? Where you kind of, going on doing research. But I do this all the time, random. Like, you could be weaving baskets, especially if it's the arts or something cool, arts, technology. And I'm like, oh, shoot, how'd you weave that basket? That's so dope. Like, yo, I'm going on YouTube and I'm trying to learn how to weave baskets. And what comes out of that is a more connected conversation the next time I see you, even if you're a complete stranger. Right. And that's where, like, I feel like, although I have my passions and I have things that are important to me, it has to be that two-way street. And a lot of people aren't really like that. And we don't know, like, I don't know where you're going to be 5 years from now when we're going to run into each other. Right. And that's something that should be kind of common, like a common sentiment. Right. But it's kind of not. So I look at that and say, well, I've been cool for a long time. Like, you're never going to take my coolness from me. You're never going to take that feeling of what it is, because you're never going to be deemed better than me. Right. And so I didn't grow up that way, understanding that level of self-esteem in a way. But I look at that only because of the fact to say, how can I be as authentic as possible? How can I be as vulnerable as possible to be able to share? Because that's what our human connection is about. And that goes down kind of a deep road in a way, but it literally is pretty simple, right? It's like nature. Like, sometimes, even though I don't like ants per se, if I see it, I'll be, oh shoot, like, let me not step on that ant, like, mindfully. But it really just, it's kind of one of those things where, even from people, and I mentioned my sisters, having 6 sisters, and like understanding what not to say to women, like, early on, this is like my relationship with my sisters. Part of it is I want to be annoying and aggravating, right? I was into martial arts and stuff like that as well. So, I used to practice on my sisters all the time. Right? but like, getting this close, right? Hey, I can do this. But then understanding, like, the value of those relationships, and also understanding that I can still care about you, but, I can still care about you, but kind of like not more than me.
Yep.
So understanding what that's really all about, this being healthy, right? So I know my boundaries. That's all. This is boundaries. That's all that is. So when you're growing up in a street environment, which I'm still immersed in the street environment now, I use that to my benefit because of the fact that those are human beings, right? These people that may seem sketchy to someone or whatever, well, it could even be my family or a friend or a young person, a mentor, or an older person I'm turning on a career opportunity with, or an idea that, something, not all white people are bad. Like, I didn't know what we went up, it's like literally growing up with racism, growing up with a lot of things, like that, where, you have to kind of figure out, like, why is this person good and why is this person bad? In Dorchester, back in the day when I was a kid, it was literally like that. Everybody knew my father had a gun. My father used to stay up overnight so we could sleep with his gun in the car. And this is in Dorchester, right? So you wouldn't really think about it. And I'm old, but I'm not that old. So it's still in recent times, of growing up with that, but then saying, like, oh, I'm going to, I'm the little kid, right? So I'm just going to go down the street and go play ball with my friend, who's the other white kid down the street. Right. So, and it's literally that toxic, like really toxic and violent environment of waking up with your windows broken, but trying to figure out, how do I actually still be a little kid? I think about that now, and I think about those that are kind of the challenges, but I'm kind of lucky that whatever told me that people were people, and, something like this person's bad and this one, may not be so nice, before is like, go fight, right? That's all we do is fight because we're violent. Now it's like, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I say that across the board, like, this is not my issue. You got to work on that. You really got to spend some time working on it. They might even have a pill and a medication. This is my friend Evelyn said, so, but that's kind of like my take on everything. It's like opportunities are opportunities. We never really know who's who. I treat everyone exactly the same. I hug everybody everywhere exactly the same. That's kind of, I didn't grow up doing that, right? I kind of learned that, again, humbling myself enough to really say, hey, something, this is cool. Like, I appreciate you, I respect you, or whatever. Give me a hug, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not something you really think about, but at the end of the day, it's like, that's the closest that you can share to care about somebody, right? And so growing up with all of my siblings, we didn't do that. I didn't have parents that, hugged and said they loved me and everything else. So it's challenging, but I did spend a lot of time in my 20s with me, just trying to figure out what's wrong, from Mars and Venus books to all kinds of stuff, relationships, and, so I've done a lot of that stuff as well, so anyway.
So how does that, obviously a very, a unique experience and upbringing and even your connections, to Bobby Brown, everything like that. Now, obviously, and this is why I wanted to invite you on the show when we met just a few weeks ago, and the content that you were showing that you do now with your music, a lot of it is very story driven, and I noticed that there's like a passion that you kind of have, almost like you're drawn towards telling a impactful story. And then additionally, I know that you do things outside in the community as well, and you serve on different boards and things like that. So I guess tell us a little bit about how all that experience led you to want to, not just get to the top and or be in your craft and just be you in your success, but to also reach a hand back or reach a hand out and bring others with you and help them with their success as well. How do you kind of walk that line?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just thinking about that as you were talking, and I think one major experience that I had, I was production manager for Jordan Knight from New Kids on the Block. So we were out on the world tour, right? You're treated like a star. I'm the Boston Dorchester kid, right? So I think I wasn't the only person of color. Like, it was, definitely pretty diverse group. But also what happens there, and you're talking about, entertainment, like, the dancers and everything else. It's like, I'm a production manager, not a road manager, right? So I'm dealing with production stuff, which is different. So my focus is like, I need to get to that country, wherever we are. I need to figure out how to translate wherever we are, right? In Universal or Sony, they had, people meet us from the local companies, right? But what goes along with that is the ugliness of how everyone else gets treated when they're not the celebrity, right? Even for me, like, I went on that tour and I told Jordan, dude, I'll go on this tour, but I got immunity. I'm doing whatever I feel like doing, because you're always still just a hired help, right? And that's one level. It's like you have the star up here, and then you have, the management, which is, us, I think road manager, and his manager would be there, his personal manager. And then you had all the other worker ants, right? The dancers and other people, other musicians or whatever. And so that was one thing. But because of that, now I'm on the inside, even here in Boston. We were with, on that particular tour, like guys like Rod Stewart and Elton John, all the Kiss concerts and everything that happens across the country in the US, right? Tons of stuff outside the US. And I realized how people are really treated really, really crappy. And it was kind of ugly. And it was an incident that happened actually here in Boston at the Continental Hotel, right, the harbor. And I think I was talking to Rod Stewart, which is really funny, right? I'm just hanging out talking to Rod Stewart, right? Just in the lobby, wherever we were coming from. And so, and again, we get used to seeing each other or whatever. You would hope that everyone treats each other exactly the same, star and no star. I don't know what you do or whatever. I don't know who your parents are or anything like that. I don't care. Like, I'm going to treat you respectfully, but I'm on the elevator, and I don't know, those rooms are like super expensive in there. And housekeeping was coming on. And the housekeeping person stopped because they must have seen whoever else. I can't remember who I was in the elevator with, because they're not allowed to come into the elevator. And I was super offended that, not offended, but I was, you know, sad in a way that in that instant, that person felt that they were that much less than me, because it may even just be on the thing. And so I'm the person that's going to grab their card, pull them in the elevator, come on in. I'm the person that's going to go find the extra food and go come in and be, yo, because I just made a friend. That's all I looked at it. You probably ate early. I don't know what you had to eat today. All I know is I have an abundance of extra stuff, right? So I did this everywhere I was at because I was a production manager. So I was the first person in the venue. I had all the backstage passes. I had everything. So I could literally, it almost became kind of a fun thing. Meet a random person in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, as I remember, this one little kid that was so cool. And they don't know, like, this is a concert, right? They're like, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I was like, tell your mom to meet me at that gate over there, because that's where Britney Spears and everybody else was back in the day. And it was always these random art, Shaggy and whatever. And so back when we had cameras, I would take their camera, go backstage, take pictures of everyone and give them back. They didn't know what I did, right? And I knew I was going to never see that kid ever again. So I would give them back the camera. And me chuckling within myself is like, they're going to develop that thing and they're going to see all these celebrities on their camera. Like, how dope is that? And if I had a chance to like take photos with them or whatever, of those celebrities, because I knew that in the premise behind that was, I knew that kid at that gate is not going to get stopped, right? Because they would have to deal with me. And I know that this is the part of like the etiquette of what people don't know about this cool factor, right? It's like, if you're respectful, part of it to benefit the young person was if that security person doesn't know if that's the niece or nephew or child of someone that's there. So I know that I can say, hey, just tell them your uncle said there, your uncle's here. And this is a little white kid, right? So that's what's hilarious when I come back, right? So, but I did that everywhere. If I had, I would stuff my bag. I always had my computer, my portable, everything with me. And I also did sound out in the audience, right? There's sound engineer in the audience. So sometimes I'd be going back and forth depending on what venue we were at. And so I would just stuff my bag with everything from our green room, and if it was hot outside, I'd just give out waters. But the reality is, it's like, it's just going to go to waste at the end of the day. We're leaving. We were in 2 or 3 time zones in one day, right? I didn't even know where I was for the most part. But that was a big shift of where I was like, something, some of the people that I was with didn't agree with that. I got into arguments and fights with people, like literally massive arguments, because they said, why did you do that? Why are you doing this? This one girl almost got raped. Literally, I'm a production manager, right? Some really crazy stuff. And I have to blow up that spot because that I don't want, like, when is that okay? Right. So that goes against what Hollywood is all about. Right. It's kind of like what's coming out now with everyone telling the truth about everything. Right. So, having receipts, as they say, right. Having those experiences, for me, it didn't change who I was at all. It just told me that I'm not going to cross this line. Like, it didn't tell me like, oh, I have to go and be Gandhi or somebody, right? I'm already made of that. Like, so if it bothers me, it should bother you. And if it doesn't bother you, that's a moral issue, right? And so once it becomes a moral issue, so that goes to what you're talking about in regards to the world, right? It's like, if I can help someone with something that's doesn't cost anything, the difference is, can that person afford this service? Right? From a corporate standpoint, is this person going to take this resource and distribute that and share that somewhere if they could? Right? Do they believe in the idea of the sharing and bartering and those kind of things? And it's a fine line as an entrepreneur because, like, I'm not on salary. So all my energy should be going to pursuing my career. Right. So this is something to this day. And I think about it from back then. I'm like, this is why I know so many people. And I've been able to do things that we've been doing for the last couple of years in particular, very intentionally, is because of the last 30 years, almost the last 40 years, of just being a kid. Like my middle school teacher, Miss Karen Kane is on my Facebook, right? And so, more recently, she's like, I want to say it was something before COVID, but she's like, Malik, you're still the same person you were in middle school. I'm like, who was I in middle school? Like, what are you talking about? And we're cool, but if she needed help at her house, I would go over and help her fix something at her house or whatever. She's 75, probably, now, something like that. But she's one of those people back then. And I thought about, I was like, what is she talking about? I'm like, yeah, I did stay after school to clean the boards. And, like, I don't even know why, outside of the fact that she was really cool and we all kind of gravitate, and we have this affinity to certain teachers, educators that we have. I had a pretty toxic household, so I didn't really have a lot of examples of those kind of mentors, but she was just being nice. And I thought I was just being the nice kid, and she would actually pay us every once in a while too. So, there's a little motive behind that. But to this day, in my mind, over all those years, I'm like, she was always really cool. And you remember things from middle school into high school, into us being adults, and every high school reunion that goes by. Our high school principal, the same person, we're still on a group chat with him now. So, every Thanksgiving we do like a little hangout before, the Wednesday before, and if he's not there, then we'll text him. He's probably, on a cruise somewhere. The last time he was on a cruise. But no, it's like all of us on a group text. And again, going to this Boston Tech High School, we didn't come home. We didn't have the benefit of coming home and playing with each other for the most part. Everyone was like from different areas. And back then we didn't have cars or whatever. If you couldn't get there on your bicycle, then, that was a wrap.
I'm hearing you speak, and I'm thinking about how, since while you were growing up, you were always somehow collaborating, right? Because you're talking about your principal and how you come together. You talk about your teacher, and how she would bring you in. You had all of these through the arts, right? Practicing music that they would tell you, come and play with us at the pub or whatever, right? So you were exposed to this. And I think that gave you somehow a platform to or forum to see the humanity in others, and for them to see your humanity too, right? And so then I think that throughout the years, that's why you are who you are, right? Because you've been kind of falling into or stepping into these spaces where you were able to exercise that muscle of seeing others for who they were, and then sharing ideas, sharing your thoughts, your heart, your talents, and creating that kind of skill, really, because it's hard. It's so hard to find people that you can really collaborate with in a very open and genuine and generous, right? Space, because it's true what you said. I love what you said. It's like, I've always been cool, right? And you can't take that away from me, right? So you go into these things unafraid, right? Like, you're not a hoarder. It sends, like, you're not a gatekeeper, you're not a hoarder, you're not. And I think it's because you kind of grew up walking into these spaces where you were afforded these opportunities to see others, right? And connect with others at that human to human level, and then create stuff, where there was none, right? Because you had no resources. So you had to make it happen basically for yourself. And I think that is just so powerful. And I love now, because I want to mention, right, how you've been working for the past 3 years on the Secret Society of Black Creatives and giving back in a more structured way, right? And so how did that come about, right? It's like, I feel like you've given back, like, and brought people up with you, right? And elevated them. But how, like, what was that switch that made you create something that would then be dedicated specifically, right, to support others that are walking your same journey? They're just maybe a little bit just behind, right?
This concludes part 1 of Malik Williams' episode. Tune in next week for part 2.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. Thank you for tuning in, and tell your friends to find us on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And remember, if you have something to say, It's time to show up and speak up.